Your Human and You. Written by Mad Max the Black. Chapter 14. Your Family and Your Human, Part 2. Despite it being midday on Saturday, Ponyville's train station was relatively empty. Only a few ponies were present, waiting to board the train or waiting for some pony to disembark. Max and Twilight made their way through the station, the leash to Max's collar grasped firmly in Twilight's magic.
The train departs in 15 minutes.
She muttered under her breath to the human.
We just need to purchase the tickets and then get aboard.
She glanced back at Max and received the faintest of nods. His expression was blank and emotionless. His eyes seemed glazed over, almost out of focus, but she knew that he was secretly observing the world around him. As they approached the ticket booth, Twilight cleared her throat, catching the attention of the pony behind the counter. As he turned to look at her, she smiled brightly at him.
I'd like 2 tickets to Canterlot, please,
she said, pushing magic through her horn and placing the bits on the counter with a soft clink. The stallion behind the counter glanced down at the bits, then looked back up at her. His eyes then flicked over to Max for a brief second before he shook his head, his bored expression never changing. Sorry, miss, but we don't allow humans to ride in any of the train cars unless it's first class. He sighed, sounding like she was wasting his time. Turning towards Max, he continued the same bored manner. Your human will have to travel with the baggage, with all the other garbage. Just like all the other humans. No exceptions.
What if I...
No exceptions. Twilight's eyes narrowed slightly, but she managed to keep the smile on her face. Behind her, Max tensed up slightly.
Then I'll take 2 first-class tickets, please.
Forcing more magic to her horn, she lifted a few more bits onto the counter. Sorry, but there are no more first-class coaches available. Looks like your fleshy friend will have to ride in a crate today. The stallion snorted, staring at her like she was stupid. That didn't seem right to Twilight. There was barely anybody in the station at the moment, so how could there be no more first-class seats available? As she glanced confusedly at the stallion, he smirked slightly. Her eye twitched and something within her snapped.
That does it.
Twilight was used to dealing with stubborn ponies. She was friends with Rainbow Dash and Applejack, after all. She knew how to deal with stubborn ponies. The stallion behind the counter was intentionally being difficult, and she did not appreciate it, and she was not putting up with it today.
Do you know who I am?
She whispered, the smile no longer present on her face. The stallion opened his mouth, but she didn't give him a chance to answer.
I am Twilight Sparkle, one of the elements of harmony and the Princess of Magic.
One of the stallion's ears twitched and a bead of sweat began to roll down his face. Dimly in the back of her mind, Twilight realized that he probably wasn't expecting this response. He was just expecting her to shut up and put up with this Celestia Dan bullshit, but not today.
I realize that I was only recently crowned as princess, but that does not give you a reason to treat me like this. I have done nothing to deserve this, and I do not appreciate it.
Twilight leaned towards the window, glaring at the stallion with all the hatred she could muster. She could see the fear growing in his eyes.
I am trying to get to Canterlot for a very important meeting concerning my human here, and you, good sir, are preventing that. That means you are impeding with royal business, and I could have you arrested for that simple fact alone.
Twilight was bluffing, but she didn't care and he didn't know.
A simple letter, and I could have Princess Celestia or Luna down here, and you wouldn't know what hit you.
The stallion's ears were splayed back and his eyes went wide, sweat dripping down his face. Twilight smirked, still glaring at the poor pony.
That being said, I'm feeling generous today, and I am in a hurry, so why don't we try this again?
The stallion nodded fearfully before quickly pulling out 2 first-class tickets and sliding them across the counter. When he went to take the bits, Twilight's horn flared as she pulled him out of his reach.
I don't think so,
she scoffed, smiling at his confused expression.
I believe I shall be riding in the private royal coach today, and I do believe that it's free for me, as I am a princess, and I believe that my human here will be allowed to join me.
She grabbed the bits and tickets in her magic and began to trot away, leaving the stallion looking like he had just arrived around with an Ursa Minor. Approaching the train, Twilight glanced back at Max and smirked.
Looks like being a princess has its benefits after all.
He simply stared back at her with a slight frown on his face. He looked disappointed. Starlight paused, confused.
What?
She asked, tilting her head to the side. Glancing around quickly, Max made sure no pony was there before replying. I've never seen you pull rank like that before.
He was asking for it.
Twilight huffed, rolling her eyes. Max shook his head, still frowning. She opened her mouth to point out that she had every right to do what she just did, but the warning whistle sounded, causing both of them to jump.
We better get on before we're left behind.
Twilight grumbled, still annoyed that Max was upset with her. Reaching the train, they quickly hopped aboard one of the cars just as the train began to pull out of the station. The train car they entered was almost completely empty. Only 2 compartments were occupied. Twilight snorted, still disgusted by the ticket pony's behavior.
No more first-class seats available, indeed.
They made their way towards the royal coach at the front of the train, walking past compartments as they moved from car to car. As they entered the car that was attached to the royal coach, the pair came face to face with another pony and a human. The unicorn mayor's face lit up and a wide smile spread across her face as she saw them.
Well, what do we have here?
She chirped, trotting forward.
It's nice to see that somebody else had the idea to take their human with them as they travel.
The mare had a light gray coat with a blue mane that curled around her horn. Her human followed behind her, staring intently at Max the entire time. Twilight just stared at the strange mare, raising an eyebrow slightly. The mare bowed as she approached, still smiling.
A pleasure to meet you, Princess Sparkle.
She said, her eyes never leaving Twilight.
It's rather creepy, actually.
Twilight surmised, unsure of what to say. She simply said the first thing that came into her head.
And you are? Nice one, Sparkle. Real professional. Oh, forgive me.
The mare said, chuckling slightly.
My name is Wintercold, and I am one of the chair ponies at the Canterlot branch of the Weather Factory. And before you ask,
She said, cutting Twilight off as she opened her mouth.
I had nothing to do with the horrid heat wave we had several weeks ago. As my name indicates, I am part of the winter team. But you're a unicorn.
Twilight said, her eyes darting up to the mare's horn.
How can you be part of the weather team? Being able to perform magic has its benefits, darling.
Wintercold said, smirking slightly.
It also helps to have a large pile of bits to back me up. Great.
Twilight thought.
I'm dealing with a noble. No wonder she's trying to butter me up.
This was one of the reasons why she rarely went to Canterlot anymore. A growl next to the mares caused them to both look over at their humans. Winter's human was staring at Max, his lips pulled back in a slight snarl as he glared at the human. Max just glared back, his eyes narrowed. Winter's human growled again and inched closer to Max. Max's eyes hardened and he bared his teeth, fist clenching by his side. They seemed to be trying to make the other back down. As the humans tried to intimidate each other, Twilight noticed some differences in the general appearance of the two. Up until then, she didn't have a chance to compare Max with the average equestrian human. It was something that she had been wanting to do ever since Max first told her that he was from a different world, but she had never gotten around to asking Applejack if she could borrow one of her humans. There was something about Max that just seemed to be different from the equestrian humans, besides him being intelligent, but Twilight couldn't ever put her hoof on it. But now that he was face to face with one, the differences were surprisingly startling in Twilight's eyes. Max loomed over the human by a good 6 inches. The height of the train car was designed so that humans could travel comfortably with their ponies, yet the top of Max's head almost brushed the ceiling. Max's face was another difference she saw. His forehead was less prominent than Winter's human, the Christian human's forehead more square in nature. Max's nose and ears were also smaller, not nearly as blocky as that of the other humans. It was his teeth, however, that really stood out. While the equestrian human's teeth looked like they were designed for eating meat, they appeared as though they were better suited for eating fruits, vegetables, and grains. They were more flat than they were sharp, great for grinding food. Max's teeth, however, looked as if meat was something he was supposed to eat on a daily basis. They were serrated, perfect for cutting through and tearing meat, and his canines were longer than that of the other human. Between the two, Max had a more intimidating teeth, the teeth of a predator. Luckily, Winter didn't notice any of this.
Brutus, behave.
Wintercold said, scolding her human before turning her attention towards Max.
And who do we have here? This is my human, Max.
Twilight said, still keeping an eye on the other two humans. She didn't want to fight to break out on the train. She knew that she could trust Max to behave himself, but she wasn't too sure about this Brutus. If it came down to it, she could just use her magic to subdue him.
He is a very fine-looking human.
Winter said, her eyes drifting over Max's body. He just ignored her, continuing the staring contest with Brutus.
So I've been told.
Twilight growled, her voice tense. She was entirely sure what Winter was after, but she was pretty sure it was some kind of stupid favor. She really didn't want to deal with this right now, wanting to get to the private coach and relax.
How old is he?
Winter asked suddenly, her head tilting to the side. Twilight opened her mouth to respond, but froze.
I don't know his age.
She stood there, mouth agape, a blank look on her face. Even after living with Max for several months, she had never asked how old he was. Closing her mouth with a click, she glanced nervously at Max. He didn't look that old to her, but he didn't look young either.
How much time do I have left? I have no idea.
Twilight finally said, turning back to Winter.
He was a gift from a close friend. The pony she brought with him found him out in the desert, so they didn't know his age either. A shame.
Winter hissed, still studying Max closely.
I could never live without knowing how much time I had left with my human. Brutus here is only 3 years old, so I know that I still have a decent amount of time with him.
She glanced at Brutus and smiled lovingly, almost lustily. Twilight shifted uncomfortably from hoof to hoof, clearly not liking what the conversation was going. Another growl came from Brutus, and she decided to end it before it got even worse.
Well, it was nice to meet you, Miss Winter, but I am afraid that I find myself rather tired.
Twilight said, smiling awkwardly.
So, if it's all the same to you, I'll be heading to my coach. Oh, of course, darling.
Winter said, her horn flashing as she levitated a small card over to me.
If you ever find yourself in Canterlot again, feel free to pop in and say hello. My door is always open, especially for ponies such as yourself.
She smiled slightly at Twilight as she took the card in her own magic.
I'll be sure to do just that.
Twilight said, chuckling nervously before hurriedly making her way around Winter and her human, Max following close behind. As the pair made their way towards the royal coach, Max kept glancing behind over his shoulders, keeping his eyes constantly trained on Brutus. Opening the door, they slipped into the roomy private coach, and Twilight quickly shut and locked the door behind her. Sighing heavily, she collapsed upon one of the cushioned seats, unfurling her wings and closing her eyes.
Hopefully this day gets better.
She thought to herself as Max shuffled over and sat down to the seat opposite of her. Twilight just laid there, feeling the gentle rumble of the train beneath her as she tried to relax. Opening her eyes, she glanced over at her human. Max was currently leaning against the wall, watching the countryside flash by with a blank look on his face. As she watched them, the conversation she had with Winter played through Twilight's mind again, and when she came to the part about Max's age, her stomach tightened slightly. Exhaling loudly, Twilight sat up and turned around to face Max. She cleared her throat, catching Max's attention. He turned his head, raising an eyebrow as he looked at her.
That entire disturbing conversation aside, Winter brought up a good point.
She said, her voice trembling slightly. It was everything she could do to stop her voice from cracking.
How old are you exactly?
Max stared at her, chewing the inside of his cheek absentmindedly for several seconds before answering. I'm currently 20 years old.
What?
Twilight shrieked, her wings snapping open wide as she stared at him in horror. Max jerked backwards, his eyes widening in shock at her response.
But...
Twilight stuttered out, the whites of her eyes showing.
It's impossible!
Why do you say that? Max asked, looking confused and slightly terrified.
The average human only lives for 15 or so years. In fact, the oldest human on record was only 17 years, 3 months, and 16 days old.
Tears began to well up in the corner of Twilight's eyes, and she sniffed pitifully.
If it's true that you're 20 years old, that means That means you're going to...
She couldn't finish the sentence. The very thought of what was coming was too much for her. She dropped her gaze to the floor, tears starting to flow freely down her face.
How many days does he have left?
She thought to herself.
Is he simply living on borrowed time? Am I gonna wake up tomorrow and find his cold dead body on my couch?
As these thoughts raced through her head, tears continued to fall. She didn't look up, even when Max shifted in his seat. She just couldn't look at him at the moment. She did jump when Max's hand suddenly entered her vision, however. Grasping her chin, he gently lifted her head up. Starlight resisted weakly before giving in and looking up. She blinked in surprise when he was smiling at her. "I'm not going anywhere, anytime soon." He signed, releasing her face. More tears fell as Twilight stared at him sadly.
But the average human only lives for...
She began to blubber out, only to be interrupted as Max placed his finger against her lips. "Humans in your world might die early," he signed. "But where I come from, 20 years is quite young for a human." Twilight blinked up at him, his smiling face blurred slightly due to her tears.
What do you mean?
She asked, trying to fight off a fresh wave of sorrow.
How old do humans get in your world?
"Where I come from, humans can live anywhere from 80 to 100 years, depending on their lifestyle." Twilight inhaled sharply, staring up at Max in shock.
80 to 100?
She wheezed, stunned by the revelation. Hope slowly began to rise up in her chest. But she quickly pushed it down, eyes narrowing. She studied Max's face closely.
He's joking.
She thought darkly.
He has to be.
She wanted desperately to believe him, but it seemed too good to be true.
You aren't lying to me, are you?
She asked. Still smiling, Max just shook his head.
You're going to live for another 60 years? Maybe more?
He nodded, the smile still present. Twilight studied his face for a few more seconds, but she couldn't see any signs of deception. Still, she had to be sure.
You promise?
She asked, her voice cracking slightly. Max nodded again. Then he did something that caused Twilight's breath to catch in her throat and her heart to forget to beat for several seconds. Reaching up, he made a crossing motion over his heart with his hand before reaching up and placing his palm over his eye. A pinky promise. Twilight knew that he knew what it meant. He had seen Pinky do it once before, and had asked what the significance behind it was. When Twilight had explained to him, Max had simply scoffed. When asked what was funny, he had replied that trying to hold someone to their promise was ridiculous. What if something happened that was out of their control? Yet, here he was, using the promise to show her that he would still be with her for many more years. Twilight's heart soared in her chest, and a large, dopey grin spread across her face.
I still have 60 more years with him.
The very thought sent shivers down her spine.
We still have 60 years together.
Leaping from her cushion, she wrapped her legs around Max, hugging him tightly as she snuggled into his chest. Max couldn't help but chuckle as he returned the hug. The pair stayed like that for several minutes, enjoying each other's company. With Max's arms wrapped firmly around her, Twilight snuggled deeper into his lap, cooing happily as she enjoyed the feeling. His body was surprisingly warm. She could feel the heat coming off of him even through the clothing that Rarity had made for him. She could hear his heart beating in his chest over the sound of the train, pushing life-giving blood through his veins. Twilight sighed happily, knowing that that heart was going to continue to work for many years to come. Thank you guys for your infinite patience. I am still not 100% over. It was allergies at first, and I think that bled into sickness because now I'm sick. However, I am good enough to at least try to record, and I don't absolutely hate how I sound right now. So again, forgive me if the voices are a little off. I am desperately hoping that within like the next week or so that this sickness will go away and I'll be back fully and committed right back to the normal uploading schedule. However, I'll be trying to at least get one more video out this week, maybe two if I can really push it, but we'll see how it goes. However, what I would like to thank are my wonderful Patreons. Thank you, Balance Kindness, Chase Lemaster, Dreamless, Portal, Hyperlink, Jason, HK4K, Texture, Nightingale, Macario, Pony Pony Entertainment, Starlight, Blaze, Rain Flicker, my Tier 2s, Captain Blueshadow, Chaotic Mist, The Anime Ghost, DJMX 2000, Elemental Wolf, H1 Wolf, King Potato 20, Mr. Crazy Deacon, Mackenzie, McCullough, Nocturne, Papa Ledin, Redeemer of Dark, Solus, Eclipse, Sword Brother, Mordred, Artie Bryant, Riani, Dragonwolf, and a brand new Tier 2 Solar Comet. I appreciate your support, man. Thank you so much. Also, a big thank you to my previous Titan tiers, Dark Guardian, Danish Dash, and Maverick. A large thank you to my current ones, User 1842 and Silent Titan. I appreciate your guys' support so freaking much, and it means a ton to me. That aside, however, this has been Firehearth. Have a wonderful day.